Hello? Yeah. Well, good evening, and I want to add my congratulations to a law school that is able to do something I think we all as law professors cherish, which is the enthusiasm of students. And it's clear to me that the numbers here and their clear focus on the themes for tonight manifest that enthusiasm. And it's something for which both teachers and yourselves as students should be proud. So many thanks. I want to talk about issues that follow on from the themes very well introduced by my colleague Surya Deva. I want to try and identify what has happened, and a lot has happened, in this area of business and human rights since our first international seminar held here at the university. And in doing this, while we're going to be hearing about these developments in the coming days, and as well as more tonight, I want to draw your attention to a particular issue that I think shadows many of these developments that are happening. And it's an issue that has to be confronted if the project of linking business and human rights is not to run into the dust. And in taking this issue on tonight, I'm going to take a bit of a risk because I'm going to throw you into some detail. But I hope that it's detail that will show how human rights potentially can work in the inside workings of a corporation. I want you to assume that we have managed successfully to link business and human rights. That is to say, we are coming toward an increasing agreement around the world that the two are related to one another. But now we faced the next issue, and that is how we deal with the competition between these human rights and the other interests that a corporation serves when it's dedicated to private commercial objectives. At this point, it's not enough to keep repeating the fact that business must respect human rights. We have to know exactly how. If it's going to be of any use out there in the field, we have to know at what point we can put our finger on an inadequate recognition of a human right and throw into relief what is an adequate recognition. It's at that point that we may well find surprises. Consider the following situation. And it's a situation I've had practical experience of in the work at Essex that we do on business and human rights. In the course of building and operating a petroleum pipeline for the export of oil from Chad, the Lake Chad in the middle of Africa, through Cameroon and then to the world at large, ExxonMobil, the multinational petroleum company, issued the following public statement. They said, "We, the company, are steadfast in promoting respect for human rights throughout the world. We believe corporations play an important role in supporting human rights and that our presence in developing countries positively influences issues relating to the treatment of people." End of quote. Now, the construction of pipelines, such as this carrying the oil, often raises a particular problem for those human rights commitments, and it's a problem of health. The health of local populations faced with this transport of the oil. How so? Well, the particular example we dealt with at Essex was the use of heavy lorries, heavy vehicles that go and come from the oil wells. And in doing so, they generate a tremendous amount of dust. And the dust goes into the lungs of the people who are in the village, particularly affecting the health of the old and the young. Clearly, a human rights problem, given that we have a dedication to the highest attainable level of health in the International Covenant on Economic and Social Rights, among others. So there's a problem. Now, how do we deal with the problem? Well, in fact, in these situations, there are two ways you can deal with the problem. Both give some degree of protection for human right. One is to simply demand that your trucks, your lorries that go through the village slow down, and slow down in a way that will reduce, but not eliminate, the generation of the dust. You'll certainly achieve a margin of help to the health of local populations. But contrast this with another alternative, and that is that you hold operations and you build a bypass road around. Now, clearly here, in the second solution, the gain to health is enormous. But of course, as well, there's a strong extra expense for the company. Now, the question is, what do you do if you are the CEO of ExxonMobil in these countries and you have to make a decision? Now, to complicate matters, and this does happen, imagine you are trying to make a decision and you get news that the oil price, the world oil price, is set to increase dramatically in the next 6 months. And after that, it's going to fall back to its original level. And if you can, as a company, take advantage of this hike by moving quickly, you will produce high levels of long-term profit, that is to say, profit that you can use long-term for investment in future products and help your shareholders. Well, clearly, this commercial prediction about the price of your product will have impact on this apparently small question, what do I do about those roads? What should our CEO do when faced with these two possibilities? Well, imagine you're going to be democratic about it, so you go and you consult. And here, imagine you consult the following people. First is your strategic planning officer. And this person tells you, you should move ahead quickly. Go through the villages, get your lorries to slow down a bit to reduce the level of dust, but by no means delay things in going around the village. Be ready to pay the price of a higher level of illness, but if you don't do this, you will lose the chance of long-term gains in terms of the company's investment plans. Your financial planning officer then gives you further advice and says, you should also go directly through the villages, and don't worry about the damage to health, because a large contingency fund has been set aside for this problem to deal with it if and when people complain. So you can get the best of both worlds. You can go directly through the village, pay for people whose rights have been violated if and when they bring it up, and apart from that, carry on. And then finally, well, not finally, but then the third kind of advice, still in the same direction, comes from your corporate lawyer. And the corporate legal advisor tells you, you have an overall obligation to your shareholders. Yes, you must take account of damage you're doing to the local population, but ultimately, the primary objective you've got is to satisfy the long-term interests of your shareholders. Finally, you consult a human rights specialist. And this person takes a fairly different line. First of all, this person says, you have an obligation, were you the state, you're not, you're the corporation, but were you the state, you have an obligation to provide the highest attainable level of health protection as per international law. And that means the state must aim within, as the law puts it, the envelope of its available resources to go for the highest level. And, says this individual, the state would be correct in forcing you, the company, as a condition of you carrying and having a license to build that road. Otherwise, you lose your license. That would be the human rights approach, says this individual. But of course, you're not the company. Ah, yes, but says the human rights advisor, listening to Professor Ruggie, listening to the UN guiding principles, the corporation should do the same, not wait on the state to act. It should equally build the bypass road rather than carrying on causing this damage, despite the commercial gain. And the human rights advisor particularly takes a bad view, a strong view, of your readiness to pay compensation for the damage you'll be doing. This is wrong because she said there's a matter of principle here. A human right is not respected if all that there is standing behind the obligation to respect that right is a readiness to pay for it. That's simply saying, I can purchase your right by paying after the damage happens for it. And that, she says, simply fails to understand what human rights require. As the fundamental principle does require, you should try and avoid damage rather than think you can buy your way out of it. Now, clearly we have two different sets of advice, turning around this small but crucial question, where do I put the road for this company? And there's a great deal at stake. Human rights in both of these strategies, vis-a-vis the road, are figuring in people's calculations. The company is respecting human rights in both cases, but clearly the level of respect, the degree to which the respect is given is radically different. And what's at stake here is just how a human right is to be adjusted against commercial pressures coming from companies. As we've seen, company law and financial thinking basically says you must give priority to your commercial objectives, and then as a secondary, an important but secondary consideration, pay attention to the damage to the health of your population. Human rights law takes hold of the same key issues and turns them around. It says your starting point is the human right involved. Yes, to your commercial objectives, but pursue them in a way that does least damage to your human right. It's the opposite way of adjusting that happens between companies and human rights. Now we face a choice here. If we really think, if we're linking these domains of law, corporate, financial, and human rights law, we face a choice. Because we have to decide which of these interests are primary and which are secondary when they do compete with one another on the corporate agenda. And when they do clash, as in this example I gave you, we can't afford to sit on the fence. Corporate managers need concrete answers to concrete questions. What do I do about access roads through villages to my oil field? That's their question. And it can't be right to say that the access road should go through villages as a matter of corporate law, but that they should go around the villages as a matter of human rights law. Come on. That leaves our corporate director in no man's land with no answer. So we can't afford this kind of degree of unclarity. We can't afford navigating with compass needles that point us in different directions. We need a coherent, consistent answer to these questions, and this faces businesses every day as they deal with victims and others affected by what they do. I put to you that any advances on the developments you're going to be considering this week, be it the advance on an international treaty on business and human rights, be it the issues about adequate consultation with populations before their land is expropriated, or be it what counts as due diligence in avoiding human rights violations, none of these requirements will progress really until we get clear about whether or not human rights priorities will set the benchmark to which other interests in the corporate world have to adjust, or vice versa, where the human rights will have to do their adjusting to meet corporate interests. Problem is not an easy one, and the current worldwide interest in this whole linkage is crucial. It carries a promise and a threat. It may introduce, linking these two, business and human rights, may introduce a way of preserving and improving on human rights protection in ways that will mark a revolution. It may be that they will produce real protection against fresh threats from private power. Or, linking human rights and business may do the opposite. It may subvert human rights. It may subvert the whole spirit and purpose of human rights in a way that will take generations to put right. The choice is up to us. Thank you.